Hi, Dr. Lamb. How are you this evening? You're on mute.
Of course I'm on mute. I'm excited to be here. I'm in lovely Lake Norman this evening.
Okay. I thought your backdrop looked a little different.
Yeah, yeah, the lake's right there. And so yeah, I'm home today. I didn't travel. It was awfully stormy here this morning, and it didn't let up till about noon. We had a lot of bad storms and lightning. But it still got to about 90 degrees today, but it didn't clear off till after lunch. But yeah, we had a bad, it kept us up a lot during the night. It was pretty bad here overnight and this morning. So I hung around here. I'll be on campus tomorrow and the next 3 days. So I took a powder today. Let's see what it says here. It's only 90. It's only 95 here now, so it's not bad. It's a little warm here on the lake always because of the heat. Tiffany, did you and Tara, did y'all get the High School Athletic Association handbook that I sent out?
Yes.
That we were talking about, and you saw those guidelines on how many pitches you can throw, how many innings you can play, how much you can practice, when you can practice. Harkening back to my Rutherford County days, I got in trouble. I took my team, my baseball team, preseason up to McDowell County, and just to have a practice and scrimmage a few innings with Coy up at McDowell High School. But we had a work day, an unplanned work day, and it wasn't on the calendar, and I didn't think anything of it. You can't practice on teacher work days or before the end of the day. And because we were going up to McDowell County, we didn't actually play until after what school would have been out, but we had to travel. And you can't do that before the end of the school day. And they acted like I had burnt the building down over something as simple as that. But that was good training for me. I learned early that people watch that kind of stuff. As I told you, when I got to Olympic High School, my football coach was on probation. I ended up letting him go because he didn't do any better. But what he had done, now he didn't agree with it. Now I'm not the one that put him on probation and did that, but I inherited him on probation. So, North Carolina does not allow spring football practice. Now they have it in South Carolina. I'll be full disclosure, but North Carolina does not allow spring football practice of any kind. I don't mean just blocking and tackling of any kind. You cannot assemble your team. And he had assembled his team, and they were doing some conditioning drills. No football, no blocking, no tackle, shirts and shorts out in the spring of the year. And was doing, and somebody reported him, and the district athletic director showed up and caught him doing that. Wasn't practicing, just doing some conditioning for some of the boys who now full disclosure, and I can say this because I'm a big person, but that was one of the things that was a problem when I got there. His kids, a lot of his football players didn't do anything in the spring, and they would just get set and eat and watch Monday Night Raw and eat, pizza. And he had some big boys. I mean, some big ones. And that was the first thing I did was, we got to put these boys on the program. I mean, this is they're going to, their lifespan is going to be greatly decreased by. I mean, we had some whoppers. I mean, some boys that were way overweight. And he had simply been trying to do some conditioning, trying to get them to do some things. But we did a little more formal, and we did it a different way where we could get away with it. But yeah, he was on probation. He'd been sanctioned by the High School Athletic Association when I got there for simply bringing the team together in the off season. They considered that a practice. And so this notion from our case study last week, now Bobby might be spending too much time on baseball, but you better make sure he's not spending too much with your school, because not only do they sanction coaches, they sanction the administrators as well. That's why I said the good thing for me was that they'd already sanctioned my football coach when I arrived. But part of the reason why I arrived is because the sanctions against the former principal. He had some, it was kind of the straw. If his record had been clean, he could have probably survived it. But along with some other things, practicing football out of season will get a high school principal in trouble in a hurry. And so he didn't survive it. And so I was the new principal. So that's what I'm telling you is if I went to a middle school or a high school, even as an assistant principal, I would make sure that blue and yellow, that blue and orange book was my constant companion dealing with athletics. And so the part that you got to understand is even if it's not covered expressly under middle schools, DPI, Department of Public Instruction, is the enforcement agency for middle schools, and they use the same rule book. So you just might as well learn the rule book, and you better do that. But yeah, athletics is highly, highly, highly regulated. Minutes, pitches, when you can practice, when you can play, when you can scrimmage, when you can't scrimmage, all of those kinds of things, how many times you can go to camp, all that stuff is highly regulated by the athletic association in each state. So make sure that you know those now. Full disclosure, a lot of kids over practice and spend too much time, but it's because they're involved with travel ball or local teams or AAU basketball. AAU basketball used to be the bane of my existence because I inherited a basketball coach at the high school level who was an AAU coach as well. And he couldn't seem to understand that he couldn't do the same things in high school that he could do in AAU because they didn't care. But you couldn't do those same things. And again, we had to part company as well because he could not hold it, but within the guidelines, within the parameters. And once you find you have a coach who has a problem with the rules, you might as well bite the bullet and handle that problem. It's not going to get any better. That goes back, and I wanted to mention that specifically. That goes back to our ethical paradigm and goes just back to what we were talking about that teacher last week as we continue to debrief from our case study. If she would do this, what wouldn't she do? I mean, she violated all four of the ethical paradigms. She broke federal, state law, and local board policy. Violated all four of the ethical paradigms. I mean, how much worse could it have been? I mean, the only thing she could have done worse was been to physically or sexually abuse Bobby. So, you know, it's just going to be a matter of time. And the question is will it get her or will it get you and her? And that's the notion when you have folks, when you have coaches who can't follow the rules and who cheat, recruit kids, you know, have boosters provide them places to stay, you know, all of these things, practice out of season, go too long, you know, fill in the blank. It's a pattern of behavior. It's not going to stop. It's just not going to stop. And it won't stop until you get fired, because you're the person that's supposed to be supervising that stuff. So that's just a word to the wise. Again, we talked last week, you know, an action plan for this teacher would certainly be appropriate. I would not argue if you got rid of the teacher entirely. That would be I would certainly attempt that. I could not work with somebody who I had to watch every day to make sure they weren't abusing kids. So that kind of
Dr. Wayne.
Yes.
So are there specific school laws when it comes to guns and toy guns?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah, there certainly are. And so that's one of the things that we're going to cover tonight. We're going to go through a lot of that kind of stuff. We're going to look at those things. Who have I got with me? Amanda and Brittany, thank you both for having submitted your task too. And then of course, Tara's got hers in the hopper. But as a reminder, be sure to include that professional growth plan at the end of task 3. That's what I need when it comes time for grading on that thing. And let's talk about task 3. Here are some options. It says redo the master schedule for your entire school. If you're in elementary school, not a big deal, maybe even a middle school. If you're at a high school, you can do a department like, you know, CTE or math, but make sure it's not just, you know, a couple of teachers. Try to do as much of your school as possible. Let me repeat myself again. If you're in elementary school, you should do the whole schedule. If you're at a middle school, you try to do the whole schedule. If you can't, if it's too big, if you've got like within a school or something like that. High school, you can do a department or a division like fine arts or CTE or physical and mathematical sciences, the math and science department. You can do something like that, but try to be as encompass as much of your school as you can in your master schedule. Your grade will, the grade that the state graders give you will be reflective of that. If you just do a small part of the school, they'll grade you down pretty heavily on that on task 3. But task 3 is pretty self-explanatory. You've gotten all this information, you know everything about your school from task 1. You've got your professional growth plan. You've identified how much professional and what kind of growth staff development you're going to do and how that's going to affect your schedule. So now it's time to build you a new master schedule. Make sure you start with your state court, state law first. Federal law, state law, local board policy, your growth data, what teachers should be with what kids, and then teacher input when you're redoing your master schedule. And you can just redo one more small piece of it, but make sure that the whole thing is encompassed.
Dr. Lamb, I have a question.
Yes.
I'm over summer school and I had to create a schedule for that. Can I use that schedule that I've
Absolutely.
done? Okay, thank you.
Don't reinvent the wheel. If you've created one for summer school, that's a good one. Now, my Wednesday night class, Savannah met with us, what was it, last week or week before? I guess it was week before. She's from my Wednesday night class. And the reason why I keep y'all separate is they're all from one district. All 14 of them are from Gaston County. They're all working in summer school. And so that's what they're doing. They've assigned all of them a summer job. This is a partnership between Gardner Webb and Gaston County Schools. And so they're all doing that. And so their experience is a little bit different from yours in that they all get to play administrator this summer. And so they're all involved with summer school. they're learning a lot. They're having a big time. But now, part of the issue with them is they're only learning how to do things in Gaston County, and I want y'all to learn how to do it everywhere. I mean, we're training them only to work in Gaston County. They have a 5-year, well, they have a 7-year commitment to Gaston County to do this program. And so we're only doing Gaston County. Everything is Gaston County. And that's not very wide. As you know, everywhere is different. Just like when we were talking about hiring, the system is different everywhere. The due process, everything's different everywhere. But we're only doing them. And so I didn't think it would be fair to them or to y'all to put y'all together this summer, because they just do one thing. And y'all need to be much broader than that. They're doing a 2-year commitment in this program, then they're obligated to do 5 more years in Gaston. So we're only training them for Gaston, which is different. But that's a great question. So if you're doing summer school, that schedule would be great. Again, it's about the process. Do you know to start with your federal programs? Look at them first. Make sure that and then go by your state guidelines, number of minutes, classes offered, class size limits, duty-free, planning time, all that stuff. You got to do that. And then your local policy. How many minutes of this? How many minutes of that? I told you the story about Hickory Grove. They had to, on Monday, start a whole brand new schedule that they had already finished for the next year because the board decided that they were going to increase the number of minutes of reading instruction every day from 90 to 120 to accommodate reading 3D. That was the year that it was adopted statewide. And the board said, we want you to teach 120 minutes a day of reading. Well, their schedule was based on 90 minutes. That sounds like an easy fix, but as y'all will figure out when you're working on your schedules, that's not an easy fix. That affects everything to make that big a change in your daily schedule. And of course, that comes third. And then your EVOS data, if your administrator will share that with you, who ought to be teaching what, where, when, and why. And, EVOS is value added. It says what teachers get the best results with which kids. And then, of course, last comes teacher input. Now, I told you the story where I went to the school and I had to go back 2 weeks later because the principal confused what the order was in the rationale for scheduling the school. He went with teacher input first rather than federal law. And so when he put students who weren't supposed to be in Title I teacher's room, she told them. And as I've told you, you don't misspend federal money but one time. The feds have no sense of humor over stuff like that. You have to repay the money and there's penalty. So that's the case here. So make sure that you follow your rationale. You work through federal, state, local performance data, then teacher input when you're making out your revised schedule or when you're making out a new summer school schedule. Make sure you follow that rationale. All right, so we've talked about our case study. I want to talk before we go to our tasks for the week. Again, I thank Brittany and Amanda and Tara for they've already moved to task 2, so they're moving into task 3. Make sure that you include your professional growth plan in task 2. We talked about task 3 options. Shouldn't have any of those. So let's talk about case study 2 that y'all will be new next week. Now, at the end of case study 2, there is a document. Let me share my screen. Okay. So if you click on case study 2 and roll through the case, and I put it here so that you would find it, it says Leandro Duke Law. If you click on that, Here we go. So this kind of summarizes Leandro for you. And now you should do a little deeper research, but it kind of summarizes Leandro. Obviously in 94, again, full disclosure. I finished at Chapel Hill in 91 and I came back and worked with them. I finished my doctorate and my legal training at Chapel Hill in 91. I wish I was young enough to have been finished undergraduate, but anyway, I went back and worked with the Institute for Government. Now, when I was as a doctoral student and research associate at Chapel Hill, the Institute of Government was actually on campus. It moved right after I left Chapel Hill. It moved over to the Friday Center. But the Institute of Government, one of the big things that they do is they train people who get elected to school boards and city, county commissioners, those people. They go and spend a few weeks, and they even do the Principals Institute, and where they do some legal training with you. That it's kind of fallen out of favor now. There's Assistant Principals Institute there, but anyway, I went back and worked with them, and we were assisting the plaintiffs from Halifax, Robeson, Vance, and Cumberland counties. We were assisting them in their lawsuit. It was filed in 94 and was decided in 97. Full disclosure, the plaintiffs lost. So when you see held, and this tells what they were arguing about. When you see held, this is what the decision is, or decision was. Now, Leandro and Wested continues even today. So what they said was a unanimous court stated neither school districts nor counties have any constitutional right to equal funding. So what that means is, again, let me go back and make sure we're clear here. Let me stop. You have a number of sources of funds in your district. You have federal money, and it comes per student for federal programs that you did your audit of in task one. You have state money that comes per pupil, $8,000 per pupil. Now, remembering, it doesn't come $8,000 at one time. It comes in 10 installments of 800 minus absenteeism. So if your district absenteeism for that month was 5%, they deduct 5% of that 800, which would be, so they would send you $760 for for each of the students that attended, not the number on the roll, but the number that attended. So that's your state money. It's allotted monthly. You spend your money the first month, they reimburse you. That's the way the modified accrual accounting system works. They don't give you the money up front. You spend your money, fund balance on hand. If you spend it correctly, they reimburse it at the rate of $800 per pupil minus absenteeism. They send it in 10 installments. And then you've got your local money, which comes from property taxes and business taxes. That's your local that you can spend. Now, the bulk of the local is eaten up by capital. What happened in 1966, North Carolina got out of school funding for buildings and maintenance of buildings. That's left up to the local, the LEA, the local education agency, the 100 county systems and the 14 city systems in North Carolina and all of the charter schools and even private schools are responsible for their own facilities. The state doesn't pay for any of those. You got to come up with your own facilities. And you got to pay to keep them up. And so what the poor counties were arguing is, because our tax base is much less for business and our properties aren't worth that much, the property taxes, we can't afford to add very much money to that $8,000 that the state gives us. And so their argument was, is Robinson County was adding 0 extra dollars, because they were having to spend money on capital over here. They were putting 0 extra dollars in buildings, hiring extra teachers or doing any of that. Charlotte Mecklenburg was adding another $4,000. So in the end, kids in Charlotte Mecklenburg in the building, they were having $12,000 spent on them. And Robinson County, Halifax, Cumberland, Hope, they only had 8,000 spent on them. And so the lawsuit was, we want you to do a district power equalizing with a recapture provision, where instead of giving them 8,000 per pupil, like Charlotte Meck, the rich districts, give them 6, take the extra 2 and give it to us. So you now give us 10, you give them 6, they've got 4,000 locally to add. So we both end up at 10. Simple math. Again, the notion here is you take from the rich, give to the poor, and the rich add their money, and they both end up with 10, rather than Charlotte Mecklenburg 12 and Hope 8. However, the lawsuit was decided that said there is no constitutional right to equal funding. We give you enough. You are entitled to a basic education. For us to fund that, we think it costs $8,000 to get a basic ed. Anything over that's just extra. They said, however, we will have a lottery, and that will generate money for education that we will give to schools. It will be manna from heaven. It will be trillions of dollars. It ended up being nothing. But even what little bit does come to school districts, again, only comes as capital. That's crazy. The lottery money only generates money for schools, and just on a pork barrel, which means we allot a little bit here and a little bit there, and it doesn't come but one time. And it's politicking. And they, like I was talking about, I think it was up in Surrey County, they built a cafeteria where all 300 of the kids in the high school could eat lunch at the same time. They couldn't figure out how to have 2 lunch shifts. I had 3,000 kids in high school. We had 4. We could figure that out. They couldn't do 2. Quite seriously. And so even the money that comes to schools, public schools, from the lottery, which is minuscule, it's like less than a penny on a dollar. What is it? By the time they pay out the prizes, and the company that administers the lottery, I think they get about between 70 and 80% of the lottery money. The whole notion of the lottery is somebody wins. And they pay that advertising, that idiot that comes on Tuesday, whatever it is, does that commercial, wears that little suit, that lottery ticket. By the time there's hardly any money left over. By the time you pay for the lottery, to administer the lottery, the advertising, all of that, and the prize money, hardly anything's left. And then they have some of those opportunity scholarships for kids. I don't know what that means. You don't need a scholarship to go to a public school. So I don't know. I think that's our K-12 public school. I think those opportunity scholarships, I think those are for colleges and community colleges mostly. And so when you get down to the end of it, the lottery added no money to public schools. So they revisited Leandra. They sued again. And that's when the West Ed bunch got involved. They've changed judges again recently. And the judge said, you got to give these schools $2 billion. You got to add $2 billion in for these schools because kids aren't getting a basic ed. Of course, the legislature is fighting that. They've said the court and the judges have no legal standing to do that, that only the legislators can do that. So there's still no money coming. So the point of it is, don't be confused. when it says there's no right to equal funding, what that means is the state can continue to do the flat grant funding, that the money follows the kids. You can't take it from one kid and give it to another. It has to go to the kid that it's intended for so that he can get or she can get a basic education. That's the language. That's the notion here, is we send this money to Rutherford County, $8,000 for this kid to get a basic education. You can't take and withhold some of it and give it to another kid in that county. And we're going to make sure everybody's kid in every county, all 100 counties and all 14 city districts, those kids get the same amount. That the local can add more to it, that's just rub of the green. We have no duty or responsibility, obligation to try to balance that, to give more to the poorer places and less of the, we give everybody the same. They get the same $8,000 from Murphy to Mania, does not matter. That's the notion here. So, and again, West Ed's trying to get more money for individual poorer places, at-risk places, but they haven't got that yet. But it will only be, again, it'll be pork barrel. It will not, it'll be a one-time allotment if they get it. And more than likely, it'll go to facilities and capital needs. It won't hire teachers. Why can't it hire teachers? Because once it's allotted and gone, there's no more coming behind it. It's not a continuation budget. The reason why you can't hire teachers with it is because what do teachers expect next year? To get a check. You can't just pay them the first year and then after the money is gone, that, who's going to pay them next year? That's the problem with hiring local teachers. When you hire local teachers, you got to pay them every year. And so that's the notion here. So if we go back and we look again at the Duke law does these wonderful things where they summarize it. A unanimous court stated neither school districts nor counties have any constitutional right to equal funding. That means they get the same, but that in the end it doesn't have to be equal. What they have a right to is fundamental to receive a sound basic education. So we're giving $8,000 for everybody. We will not give more to some unless we give $8,000 to everybody, because we believe that's what it costs. If locals want to add more to it, more power to you. Of equal significance, the Supreme Court ruled that statement, not local school districts, has the ultimate constitutional right to actively safeguard the child's leander right, no exceptions, no excuses. That the state of North Carolina, not local school districts, has the ultimate constitutional obligation. So what that means is we say it's $8,000, period. And we're the ultimate authority. You as a local district board superintendent cannot say, okay, we're going to take this $8,000 and this school over here, we're going to give those kids 10, and this school over here, we're going to give them 6, because of the disparities, high risk, disadvantage. No, who's it say can only do that? The state. And they said, no, we will not do that. No exceptions, no excuses. And then they go on to define what a basic education is. So if we read that case study for next week, the superintendent wants to do exactly what the law says you can't do. And so what we find here is, in terms of the ethical paradigms, our case study last week, the teacher did the wrong thing for the wrong reason, broke the law, bad person. This week, the superintendent is trying to do the right thing. All of his ethical paradigms align. He's trying to get more help to students and families who need it. But what's the problem? Is it legal? It's not, the state says it is our responsibility and that locals cannot do that. What that means is if we send 8 for Amanda's child has to get that 8. We can't give her 6 and give Meredith's child 10. even though they're in the same county. We cannot do that. We can't move that money around. It has to go where intended. What about if you regulated the money? So, you know, can you move your own local money to do that? No, you can't do that either, because it said you can't. Districts can't take that burden on themselves. So you can't move local money. Can't move the state money that the state allots you. What about federal money? Can you move it? You know you can't move federal. It's absolutely earmarked. I mean, what do we have? What do we call it? That list of students? Head count. What is a head count? Anybody know? For exceptional children or Title I, all these federal programs are called a head count. Why do they call it a head count? And why do we count them? And why do we want to know what the kids' names are? Why shouldn't we just pick
so they can be sure the money's going where it's supposed to go?
to that exact child by name? Excellent, Meredith. Federal money comes to individual kids by name. That's how tight federal money is. That's how tight it is. You have to do a head count and tell them this money's going to Dale. He's over here in this exceptional children's class. It's going to him. You can't just say I've got 6 students over there, because what they ask you back, what's their names? Federal money comes per student by name, period. So you know you can't take money from one kid over here and give it to this one over here. Federal money comes for that kid only. State said you can't move we will not move our money. You can't move our money. And by the way, you can't move your money, your local money either. That's what that says. Let me go back and read that part again. They went on to rule that children are saying have a fundamental right to get it, but they also said that the state of North Carolina, not local school district, has the ultimate to safeguard delivery of every child, no exceptions, no excuses. So they're saying you can't move our money, you can't move your money. We're not, you can't do that. And the feds, you can't move their money because it comes per pupil to the actual to the actual pupil by name. What money would be left for him to differentiate between schools in his district? Federal money comes by name. State says you can't, Landrover ruling says you can't move state money, and it says you can't move your local money either. What money would be left for him to move to differentiate?
Grant or foundation money?
That's right. Something that would be not tied to public funds. Private money like grant or foundation money would be the only thing that would be left. What's the problem with it? It comes earmarked as well, doesn't it? You know, one of the things you got to realize about grant or foundation money is it's about as tight as federal money. Those of you, Tara's shaking her head, those of you who have worked with it, Lord, the documentation you got to do with that money. Oh, it's like you got to hire extra people just to keep up with it. It is that documentation is so rigid and so tight. But Meredith's exactly right. The only money that's not covered under Leandro is ground or foundation money, but there are such local parameters on it, especially if it happens to come from a federal grant. You really don't have much of an opportunity to move it around either. And so in the end, while this is a worthwhile notion from this superintendent, we need to be able to track and say why he can't do this. We got to know. I mean, it doesn't matter that it's the right thing to do if we believe that. If we believe that getting the resources that kids need them is the right thing to do. But even if we do, even if he checks the boxes of all the ethical paradigms, he misses all the boxes on the legal checklist. Federal, state, local, and private again, foundation and grant money. He misses the boxes on all those checks, unfortunately. So while what he wants to do is a good thing, if you believe in kids and trying to help kids, if you're a champion for children, yeah, it'd be a good thing to do that. It's just not legal, and there's no wiggle room here. I mean, he's completely hemmed in by the law on all sides. There is no escape route. There is none. There just isn't. You know, that's unfortunate, but that's the notion here. So the rule, the rule of law here is what we're supposed to learn. That no matter how good an idea, no matter how well-meaning, no matter how compassionate you are, you can't break the law. Nobody can give you permission to break the law. Now, as I told you, there was a case in Chapel Hill, Carrboro, and you can Google it. It's been within the last 5 years, right before the pandemic, where that superintendent tried to do this, and she tried to kind of skirt the law to do it. And unfortunately for her, grandmother over on the Chapel Hill side knew the law and said, this is illegal what she's doing here. And of course, they fired the finance officer for the district and allowed her to resign. They forced her out. You know, she was trying to move some money to the Carrboro side for some disadvantaged kids over there, but you know, folks don't like it when you take from their kids and give to somebody else's. And it doesn't matter how much their kids have. They don't like that. You know, folks like an advantage, an unnatural advantage. They like the thumb on the scale. There is no widespread sense of justice anymore, or of shame. We want what we want when we want it, and we are unabashed boosters for our kids, and to the expense of others. And so we have to be real careful with that. We have to watch the law. But you should Google the court case, the case of the funding deal in. And we'll talk more about it next week when we get into the actual case about what she did to try to circumvent the law. All right, so let's talk about discipline tonight. Questions you have for me on the case study for next time, task 3, any debrief on the case study from last time on the teacher. Please remember, don't be that person that doesn't understand. This was never about knowing the policy. This was never about didn't understand, somebody hadn't turned it in. This was about a teacher taking a shot at the kid. What are you going to do now, hero? You know, this is an easy call. If she had physically harmed him or sexually harmed him, that's an easy call. It's not as easy a call, and that's why that's why we do it this way. It's not as easy a call when it's just you know, she's taking the most punishment that you can give a kid short of physical or sexual abuse. What do you do now? That was the notion of the case. And you're going to have those. It's going to be tough. You're going to have people who do things that are bad every now and then. You got to expect it and be able to deal with it. So let's talk about discipline. North Carolina. So we're going to start with federal and state law, as we always do. Now, thankfully, in discipline and due process, North Carolina puts together a manual. DPI does this for you. And here's the one, the latest online version, if I can find it here. And this is what it looks like. This is from NCDPI, Center for Safer Schools. Used to be Safe and Healthy Schools or whatever it was. They changed the name every now and then. And this is what it looks like. This will become, you know, more familiar to you than most any other thing. And what it does is it condenses all your federal and state law together for you. Now, your local board policy has to be developed after this is published. Let me say that again. We have a hierarchy. Which comes first? Federal law, state law, then board policy, right? So DPI, for convenience for schools and districts, puts this together every year. After this is put together, folks have to, like, I used to have to do, read and interpret this thing. Does this portend any changes that we should have to recommend to our board in their code of conduct? Because once this has been released, what does the local then have to do? Their responsibility is to create a code of conduct as the next piece in this due process chain. And it looks like this. Code of conduct. And what it does is it attaches consequences to the infractions that the state says and federal law says should not happen in school. It attaches consequences to them. Now, sometimes it has some more things in it besides that. So let's look at this one. This one has the school board, the mission, the vision, the table of contents, and it has a page that the parents sign. And then it has a letter from the superintendent, and then it has character education in it because we want to accentuate the positives. Now, this is all well and good, and it has rights and responsibilities, what they are, what their rights are, and what their responsibilities are as well. It has all those things in there. And it has the safe harbor provision where you can turn in something and not get punished that you forgot to bring to school. And it addresses some of the hotter topics like extracurricular activities and student dress, behavior at the bus stop and conduct on property and all that, and defines some roles and does those things, has all these things you're not supposed to do. And then it gets into your disciplinary, the actual part that's the legal part, that defines what the different tiers or levels of consequences and what they are. It tells you who tier 1 is, tells you what tier 2 and tier 3 are, 4 and 5. Tells you what all those are. And then it starts the actual legal part. If you do this, you get that. It tells you if you're involved in this incident, now the state says you have to report incidents. What happened? And then it's not dependent upon the outcome or what sanction or what punishment you assigned or consequence you assigned the kid. That doesn't matter. So when you hear somebody say, I didn't have to report that in Power School because I didn't suspend that kid, that person is voluntarily losing their house. They're so stupid. The state says we report incidents, not outcomes. So under the notion of that, if Amanda shot me and left town and they didn't catch her, I guess I wouldn't be dead. Well, of course you're still dead, Dale, but that we catch Amanda and punish her or not has nothing to do with what happened. So that's the notion here. You got to get it in your mind. We report incidents, not outcomes. Now you have to tell them what you did, but the state does not regulate that. You get to decide with your local board decides what the punishment's going to be. The minimum and the maximum. This is, again, the board votes on this. We would send this to them and we don't like this. We want this less or this more or whatever. And there was a negotiation between central staff and the board. And then when we got it all hammered out, they voted, yeah, this is the code of conduct for the year. And so every district defines what the infractions that they don't want to see happen. And they give a range of what the punishment is. And so just like we looked at last week, cheating Tier 1, most you can do on a tier 1 is ISS. That's the most. And so, I mean, but what we did with him, you see, we did a 1-year expulsion with him. That's the most you can do. And it says right here, the most you can do is 1 day ISS. That's a little bit of different, little variation there, don't you think? When the handbook says the most you can do is 1 day of ISS, and the teacher, did a 1-year expulsion or exclusion for a whole year. What? You can't do that. Not according to what the local board says here. So this is the local piece of due process. We have federal law, we have state law, and then we have local board policy. All the way, that's the way it always works. So in due process, it's up to the local school board to adopt a code of conduct that says, if you get this, you get that this is your consequence. And that's what it looks like. Pretty simple. Everything is in there, and it has all the things about procedures for long-term, more than 10 days, or 365. Again, all the notices. See here what I'm talking about? All these things that have to happen, due process, if you do more than 10 days or a 365, but he got 365. Here are all the things that have to happen. Notice of long-term suspension, a meeting with a parent, DTM, disciplinary reassignment, preliminary decision, right to a due process hearing, appeal of long-term suspension automatically goes to the board hearing. And then from there, it goes to court. I told you there's 9 steps. How many did Bobby get? That would be 0. There's 9 steps that you would have to go through before you could do something like she did to Bobby. 9. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. 7 at the school level, 2 more at the civil level. Beyond that, the board hearing is automatically appealed, and it goes to a mediation, and then it goes to court. There's 9 before we, if it goes to mediation and then the decision is still Bobby's out, it goes to court, goes to juvenile court. 9 different steps in due process for what happened to Bobby. Bobby got none. And we thought we could get away with that. We didn't see that was a problem or too much, that it was both arbitrary and capricious. He gets 9 steps of due process, even if we were going to try to do that to him, and he got none. That's exactly what I was talking about. And then for expulsion, more steps. If we're going to try to go, for more than the 365, now I'll just tell you, you're wasting your time to go for the more than 365 unless somebody died. I hate to be that blunt, but it's just the truth. You're not going to get more than the 365. Now, kids, I don't care how long you say you're putting them out for, they can all appeal to come back after 365. The most that you can get is a year. Now, if you want to try to get more than 365, here's again, start all over again. You get that 9 plus all these extra ones here. If you try to do a suspension on a kid with disabilities, if it exceeds the 10 days or if it's a pattern, you got to go through manifestation determination. This is what it's telling you in the back here. All this is due process. That you can't just, again, procedures. Remember what we talked about? There's 2 types of due process: procedural. Notice that phrase there, procedures. This is procedural due process. Now, substantive is what you actually, what you did. But here's the procedures, what you got to do. Procedure is, what did you do? Did you do all these things? And if you want to go for more than 365, we got to add 5 more things to that 9 that we already did. We're now up to 14 things we have to do. You're not going to get these, by the way, unless he shot somebody and killed him. You're not going to get this. Even if he brought a gun, they're going to let it back in after a year. Unless he discharged it and killed somebody, he's coming back. Only then you're going to get those 5. That's what it talks about. They automatically get to come back or appeal to come back after 365. And they get, again, they get to students subject to 365 can petition for readmission even after 180 days. So you got to understand point of entry, point of exit, expungement of records, alternative discipline. That's what I was telling you. Even if you put a kid out for a year, even if you offer them summer school or alternative, that still doesn't change the fact that it's a federal violation of a 0 tolerance. And even if you got all these different things, but what if your district doesn't have all this stuff? All these different programs in Charlotte, because they got money. Everybody don't have money like Charlotte.
Dr. Lamb,
Yes.
is there a law to also like support people within the classroom community? Like if you were in referencing that the student brought the gun, is there a law that protects the other students in that classroom when that child comes back?
Yes. And so that's what that was referencing. Procedures for reentry. And you basically have a triage officer that does a threat assessment to protect the rights of the kids back in the room. And most of the time, they have to come back through a disciplinary program to make sure that they're ready to be put back in general pop. That's a great question, Amanda. That's very perceptive. That's exactly right. So this is what this is talking about that I have on the screen right here. They will schedule those requests. Students notify the date as made, see it, and then they have to go through. They have to meet with the triage specialist right here. But not limited, all these who have not been for more than 30 days. Right here, see this triage interview process? Face-to-face interview. Determines whether they get to come back to school or not, or they have to go through one of these programs. If they have been incarcerated even for a minute, this is mandatory. And very, very rarely will a kid who's been incarcerated for any length of time, even if he didn't have to stay long enough to spend the night, very, very rare case that kid does not have to come back through this system where they go through a student assistance program or go to a short-term center or go to positive options for 30 days or Turning Point for between 6 months and a year, or VIP, SHIP. Look at all the different programs. But to Amanda's point, to protect the other kids, the innocent kids, if that kid was incarcerated even for a moment, they're not going to come straight back to public school. They're going to go through any or all of these. Some of them will they just go from one to the next. You know, you did okay at SAP, now you go to a short term. Then you go to POP. Did okay at POP, you go to Turning Point, or VIP or SHIP. You go to one of those. Most of the time, and that's a very good question. Most of the time, say it's January, that kid's not coming back this school year. Even if he comes back, he's going to spend that going through these programs. He'll be lucky to get to come back in August. If he displays any kind of aggressive or continued violent behavior of any kind, he ain't coming back that next year either. I mean, he can stay in Turning Point until he graduates. I mean, we have some kids that graduate from Turning Point. That is correct. Who was it sent me graduation pictures last week from what was it, Warwick over in Gaston County? That's their Turning Point. It's called Warwick. I think they had about, it was in the Gaston Gazette, they had about 18 or 19 kids that graduated over there. No, I mean, you know, Gaston County is a large county. I mean, it's a bedroom community for Charlotte. They've got like 56,000 kids in Gaston County. Let's look and see.
Dr. Lamb, is it a requirement that a district has an alternative placement high school?
Mhm.
Okay.
Now, it might be a school within a school of one of their regular ones, but yes, they get governor crime bill money to have this stuff. Unless
Okay,
they
I was just,
spend it going to Las Vegas or New Orleans.
yeah, they are closing our alternative high school and sending those students back to their regular school. They're gonna call it an academy, but
Yeah,
basically
school
they'll be in
within
an
a school.
ISS room. Yeah, they'll be in an ISS room on a computer all day.
Yeah,
I just
Right.
wondered what the rule was for that.
yeah, that's not nearly as good. But again, nobody said it was as good. It's cheaper.
Dr.
Yeah.
Lamb, while you're looking that up, is there like a study that like ties into basic education of these kids' backgrounds? Like, is there a demographic pattern, or is there like Gaston County? Are they part
Poor
of
and
the
minority.
lower poverty? Like, just to see if they need to up the basic word vocabulary.
Yeah, that was the whole notion of Leandra.
Okay.
But again, the case was decided that we're not going to do it. But yeah, we know if you're poor and minority that it costs more money or that you're disadvantaged, but we don't care.
And did they break down like high school? Because even if poverty, then they don't even make the baseline to even be entered into a college.
Right. We know who it costs more to educate. We know who's at risk, but we don't care. You know, we salve our conscience by saying you get the basics and, you know, a hell and hearty handshake. Good luck to you. And we refuse to get off of that. I mean, it's been in debate all these years, and we refuse to give the extra money that we said we would. And now the court has demanded $2 billion, and the General Assembly's all bowed up, bunch of bitter old white men, all bowed up, don't want to do it. I mean, you know, you should watch some of these. You should watch some of the RAL series on this. You should get on to their live streams, their Zooms. Of course you can, but I can't. And you should watch these people. I mean, you know, but now remember, elections have consequences. These people keep getting voted in. Regardless of your politics, Republicans just, you know, have you know, driven a stake in the sand and said, we don't want to do this. We want to give the extra money that we have to charter schools and private schools. And we want to give vouchers for parents to, you know, attend private schools. We don't want to give more money to public schools. We want to give less. And so the crime bill money, that's what Meredith was just talking about. Some of this crime bill money is, you know, the governor's crime bill money is disappearing, is phasing out, and the General Assembly is deciding we don't want to fund that. We want to fund these people over here. We want to fund them. We want, because they vote for us. We want to fund people vouchers to send their kid with public money to private schools. We want to fund charter schools. Those people vote for us. People in traditional K-12 school vote Democrat. Why should we do things for them? nice things for them. We want to deliver for our constituents. And they say it just that openly. You know, we facilitate the people who vote for us. And we try to look after them and theirs because they vote us in and they give us campaign money. And on the other side, these folks, you know, that want it for K-12, well, then you vote for the people who support that, vote for the Democrat. And that's what they'll tell you. You can vote for them just as easy as you can vote for us, but we're going to facilitate the people that vote for us. It's not about right and wrong and equity, it's about votes. And that's exactly, you know, the argument before the court right now on the Leandro, on the West Ed money, the $2 billion, is not that those kids don't deserve it, it's we don't want to give it to them. We don't say they don't need it or not deserve it, but those people don't vote for us.
Dr. Lamb, it almost seems like desegregating schools without saying you're desegregating schools.
We're resegregating schools.
Right.
Remember the Capuchon lawsuit in Charlotte, and it had to be in Charlotte. Do y'all know, let's do a little legal lesson here tonight. Y'all know anything about the Scopes trial in Tennessee in 1925? All right, the two most famous attorneys of the day. One was a Democrat and a liberal, and the other was a Republican and a conservative. They were the two most famous lawyers of the day. Clarence Darrow was a liberal Democrat, atheist, who worked for the American Civil Liberties Union. And Williams Jennings Bryan was a Calvinist, Republican, conservative church guy. And they traveled around the country in orating, debating. You know, it was a great battle for the soul of the country in the 1920s. Just prior, you know, the 1920s were a very wild time in America. I mean, morals had slipped, drinking, slandering. I mean, it was, you know, a lot of money, a lot of things happened. Of course, the crash happened in 29, and, you know, we went through prohibition and some of those things as a backlash to all of the, you know, the roaring 20s, as it was called. And these were the two major proponents. Well, you know, as always, these kinds of things come to head over a particular case. It's usually something just completely fictional and made up, kind of like CRT and K-12. So the CRT of that day was evolution. And of course, Clarence Darrow was a proponent of evolution. And William Jennings Bryan was, you know, biblical. That's heresy. And so they needed a case to kind of have it out. You can't just go to the Supreme Court and say, we want to argue this side. You know how cases have to be decided in lower courts and appeal. And you need a case. And so there was, Tennessee was the most famous place that had the Butler Amendment. You can Google all of this. That said you could not teach evolution in school in Tennessee. And so there needed to be a court case to kind of have it out. And so it's unclear if John Scopes ever taught a biology lesson on evolution. Probably didn't. But anyway, he was charged, you know, this young teacher. This was all a setup. And because they wanted to try to challenge the Butler Amendment in Tennessee. So in the end, he was convicted of teaching, you know, man descended from monkeys. It was just called the Scopes monkey trial. But the whole point was to get it to on appeal, and of course, eventually, the Butler Amendment was repealed as a result of this case. But there's got to be a case to kind of do this. And so the notion here was in 1971, jumping ahead now, understanding the context. In 1971, school busing was decided federally for the whole nation on the case in Charlotte. The Swan decision was argued by Julius Chambers before the Supreme Court, and busing was upheld nationally. We must bus to desegregate schools. 1971 Swan decision, Julius Chambers. People didn't like it. I mean, didn't like it at all. Riots in high schools, trouble. You know, we'd only been integrated for 5 years, since 1966. Got real ugly, and it just continued to foment and ferment over the years. So folks wanted to repeal Swan, just like they want to repeal Roe v. Wade right now. So thinking legally, just like the Butler Amendment in Tennessee, there has to be a local case. And so where would there have to be, where would the lawsuit to repeal Swan, where would it have to start? Could it start at the Supreme Court? No, it would have to start in Charlotte, Mecklenburg, wouldn't it? So there was a fellow that moved into the town, moved into Mecklenburg County, enrolled his child in school, and promptly filed a lawsuit. All in the same day. It was a complete fix, just like the Scopes trial in Tennessee. His name was Capiccione. They weren't from Charlotte. He was paid to move there and to file a lawsuit. And of course, as a result, Swan was vacated after 30 years. But that was the whole point. It had to be the case for the appeal had to start back in Charlotte, where the Swan case originally generated from on busing. And so busing was, after 30 years, from 1971 to 2001, busing was repealed in Charlotte. Now, the reason why that was important is that was a national case. It was the Roe v. Wade abortion. Well, Swan was the busing case. And Capiccione overturned Swan after 30 years. Federal case again, but it had to start in Charlotte. And so in 2001, the Capiccione lawsuit said that busing to achieve integration was no longer legal. And if schools resegregated, the district nor the state nor the federal government had any duty to fix it if they resegregate. Now, I had just left the principalship in Charlotte, Mecklenburg, and was in the central office in 2001. Now, I fancy myself as a data guru with and legal expert, and I'll be the first to tell you I was completely wrong. That's as wrong as I've ever been. I thought it would take 8 to 12 years to resegregate schools. It took 15 minutes. I had never seen anything move as fast as resegregation of schools did in Charlotte. Overnight, 30 years was gone that fast. Just like that. Could not believe how fast schools resegregate. It just made your head spin. I mean, there was lines out the door of every guidance office in all the schools in Charlotte, Mecklenburg's kids withdrawing and going to this school over here. Lines. I mean, we had to have extra security to manage people fighting in line to withdraw their kid and enroll them somewhere else. I mean, it was a complete fruit basket turnover, just like that. Schools resegregated to 1971 levels in a week. It was done. And it would have been done in a day if we could have processed them that fast. I've never seen anything like it. I thought it would take years. I had no notion that I was going to have to send police and security to all these schools to keep people from fighting. You know, there was such a line to move their kids. It was amazing. And so I hate Kaylee's not here tonight. She something came up, an emergency came up. You know, she works for a charter school, and so one of the notions of charter schools is that we are supposed to have a particular bent or philosophy, like a traditional school or a language school or a religious school or whatever. But again, that's still a form of segregation. It's still a form of, we want this people here and these people not here, those ways. And of course, private schools are generally about who's not there as well. Um, but the whole notion here is, we have politicians who are fueling that because people will vote for them. We're not near as good a people as we thought we were. We've not come nearly as far. I was on a rant earlier today, as I am most days, about the notion of wanting to go back. I remember going, I mean, it was no picnic back in the old days. I don't understand why we're just hell bent on going back to times that weren't very good. But we are, and we want things how they used to be when things weren't nearly as good. My wife and I, our first house that we had after we were married, in 1985, the mortgage interest rate was 18% on a 30-year mortgage with 20% down. Interest was 18%. We got a 15-year mortgage at 40%, so we could get it down to 14.5% on a mortgage, folks. Tell me how times were good in the 1980s. We were frozen most of the decade on our salary, didn't make experience or raises. Tell me again how it was good. When I was a kid, I had to go to, on Sundays, I had to go to school on Sundays to get my polio vaccine. Tell me how it was good. You think COVID's bad, grow up during polio, see how that goes for you. Tell me again how it was good back in the old days. No, but that's where we're going is, I don't know that I would say it's just racist or xenophobic or whatever. It's this notion that times were much better in the past, and that we want to go back to that time. But even then, times were better for some people than others, even back then. I love women of a certain age do a comedy. That's a comedy troupe that does, and this lady talks about, you know, how wonderful it was, you know, she's being facetious and ironic, how wonderful it was back in the 50s when all married women had to do, it didn't work, and all they had to do was fix 3 meals a day and try to avoid a beating. We've forgotten all those bad parts about the bad old, you know, the bad old days. But we have this desire to go back, and it shows up in school funding. That's how you control that let's go back part, who we give money to, who we don't give money to, those kinds of things. It's that desire to go back to a time when we perceived was better. But for those of us who are old enough to have lived in those times, not so much. But that's, you know, that's the notion here. And so, yes, through financing and refusing to move off of flat grant funding, yes, we are trying to facilitate some students and not others. Now, the notion here is, you say, well, Dale, you sound like a bleeding heart liberal. Where is education, public education, allowed for? Is public education in the Constitution? No, it's in the preamble to the Constitution that states may provide public education. The whole point of public education, there's no problem. I have no problem with private schools or charter schools. There were private schools in this country before there was a country. Harvard predates the Constitution, by the way, the Declaration of Independence. The whole notion of public school is to help poor folks, to give people an opportunity, to give people a hand up. That's the whole notion of public schools. We have taken and perverted that to where we're trying to basically give people a private school experience for free on public money, while neglecting other kids that need that opportunity. I don't have a problem with the buying of the indulgences, going to private school, whatever, but that's fine. But we're you know, the whole notion, the irony here is public school was designed to help at-risk kids, and that's who we're trying to abandon, hand over fist. That's the irony. Is, you know, Public school was more than just reading and writing. It was supposed to be an opportunity for kids, that everybody could live the American dream and not a class society like in Europe. That's the whole notion of public education. Private schools have been around for hundreds of years, thousands of years. It was an opportunity for just regular people to get ahead, which is the whole American dream. That's the whole notion of America, is that people, doesn't matter about your birth, that you can rise above it. And that's what public school is about. But we have veered off to back to kind of the same notion of of private school. And that's my beef with it is we're not helping the kids that need the most help. It's easy to teach the easy ones. We need to, the whole focus is try to stop the school to prison pipeline and try to help the kids that need it. But you're exactly right. The funding does not follow that pattern. That is correct. The funding is moving the other way. And so that is true. So when we look at our case next week, although you might disagree or agree with the superintendent either way, doesn't matter. What he's doing is not legal. Doesn't seem right that it's not, but it's not. But looking at those documents, back to our topic here, we have our federal and state law, which is expressed in that manual, and then the response of the school board is to do the code of conduct that sets the parameters for the punishment and the due process. You saw that child will receive. That due process has to be spelled out. Here's what you get minimum, what you'll get maximum. That means first time, second time. What you'll get minimum, maximum, and here's the due process that you were due at each level, and here are all of our alternative programs, and here are all the things that we're going to, the 9 steps if you're up for exclusion. All that's got to be in your hand, in your code of conduct that your students receive. Has to be there. So let's go back and look now. So let's look at the big one. We've looked at the little one, kind of backwards here. So there it all is, and there that speaks to the part that Amanda asked, which is a very salient question: is what are we going to do to protect the kids? Well, you got to have a system like this to make sure that they do. You can go in and read that one. So that is the code of conduct. Now, where this starts is this one. And so what it tells you, it gives the rationale. Creating procedures for complying with statutory requirements and carrying out state board policies. And statutory means General Assembly. So you will see reference in here to NCGS. That's North Carolina General Statutes. That's laws passed by the General Assembly. And you'll also see those then become policies from DPI. DPI acts like the central office does in a school district. The board makes policy, the central office interprets and enforces it. Same thing. General Assembly passes laws, makes policy. DPI is tasked with interpreting it for you and then enforcing it, making sure it happens. And it says all LEAs have to use PowerSchool. Everything has to be put in there. This is going to inform the report card and the crime rate and suspensions and expulsions. That's why you got to put all this stuff in there. It also says that in here that Office of Civil Rights, we're collecting our federal data with this. And remember, we collect data around incidents. We have to know some things about them, but we collect, So it doesn't say if I don't suspend him, I don't have to report it. An incident occurred, regardless of what consequence we give the kid, that does not change the fact that an incident occurred. Again, if Tiffany shoots me and I leave town and we don't catch her, that doesn't mean I don't die. Her getting caught or punished has nothing to do with the fact that an incident occurred when she shot me. All right, and then here, remember, so here's the statute that certain things have to be reported. Here are the things that have to be reported. Here are the ones that count against you for your persistently dangerous. Remember, No Child Left Behind, 1991 said kids don't have to go to persistently dangerous schools. What counts in the calculation? These things right here. What is the threshold? 1 for every 200 kids, that's 0.5%, 0.5 of 1%. One incident for every 200 kids is how that works out, or 5 for every 1,000, but it's 0.5. Here are the 9 things that count against you. When you report them, they even have a prefix that says PD homicide. That means this counts against your persistently dangerous calculation. Know that before you put it in. Now, don't underreport. Don't put it down as something else, because we don't want to. We don't want to do. You have to. They have definitions on all these things in this manual, and you have to go by them. You can't just say, well, this sexual, this rape was actually just inappropriate touching. No, they've got the definitions on. And so it says right here, all the laws. Here's 115C 12 requires them to compile annual reports, data collections. As I told you, since 2014, we do the OCR, all federal reporting comes out of here. So as we learned last week, we have to go by the federal definition of an expulsion on zero tolerance, because we're doing federal reporting. See right here, we have to go by zero. We have to report these are illegal. And it says what they are right here. And it defines all this, what must be reported. Everything has to, look at this list, everything has to be reported. There is no major, there is no minor. Let me say that again. I'm gonna stop my share. Let me say that again. When I've had people say to me, we don't put the minor stuff in. What you're saying to me is I'm breaking federal and state law and local board policy. There is no major, there is no minor. Everything on that list, which is everything, goes into power school. It doesn't matter, even if you just do a conference with them or a parent contact, doesn't matter. Everything on that list goes into power school, period. There's no caveat, there's no major, there's no minor. Oh, we don't put minor stuff. There is no major, there is no minor. That language, you will not find that language in any of the manuals that I show you. Period. That is not recognized. There is no major, there is no minor. If you did this, it goes, we report it. Now, what we do in terms of the punishment, the consequence, we simply look at the code of conduct and interpret. This is our range. What are we going to give them? But this notion that we don't have to report the minor stuff, that is not true. There is no reference to that anywhere. Look at the list of things that are required to be reported. It's everything on the list. What must be reported to law enforcement? Here are the things that have to be reported to them: sexual assault, sexual offense. When we have one of your weeklies and we talk about cyberbullying, do we have to report cyberbullying to law enforcement? Absolutely, we do. They've got more powers of subpoena than we have, but sexual offense, sexual assault, yeah, we have to report cyberbullying. We have to report, sexual harassment. All that stuff is crime. We have to report it to law enforcement. Procedures, how it works. They give you some scenarios here, how to click. There's a report if you change anything that comes out, and you have to be able to justify why you changed something. Historically, what happens is schools underreport. And one of the biggest hides is bus misbehavior. Bus misbehavior is when you jump from one seat to the other. Not you were fighting on the bus. Everything that happens on the bus is not bus misbehavior. Bus misbehavior is if you stand up while the bus is moving. If you fight on the bus, that's a fight. If you have created have a sexual offense or a rape, that it's not bus misbehavior. We had a middle school in Charlotte. Parents got up in arms, went to the TV, and got really nasty about all these sexual assaults that were happening on the bus. And I went over and I said, Rudy, why aren't you reporting these? Well, I am. Well, show me. We're right here. I said, buddy, that says bus misbehavior. He said, what happened on the bus? Well, no. If I shoot you on the bus, does that mean that's just bus misbehavior and you die? No, that's murder. Schools underreport, and then they get caught, and then people have to go home. And it tells you how to do these things. It has different scenarios in here, what you're to report and what it is. And if we go on and on and on here, definitions, look, it's got all these definitions. It's got definitions of the big ones back in the back of the book here. Oh Lord, it's got stuff here. It's got all the info, again, UB is unacceptable behavior. If it's got a RO in front of it, that means you got to report it to law enforcement. It's got a PD. That means that it's going to count against your total. You tell it where it happened, who did it. See here, PD, assault. That means it's going to count against your total of 0.5 of 1%. One for every 200 kids. 2 years in a row of that, you have to go home. You're out of work. ROs, that's reportable offense. That means you have to call police. PD, UBs, you don't have to. Now, there's 4 UBs that are an exception. If they have a general statute behind this, that means it's a violation of the law. And even though the state doesn't characterize it as an RO, you have to call the law anyway because it's communicating threats, alcohol possession, disorderly, and I think it's burning of a school building. It's the other. There are 4 of them right here. There it is. Smarter than I thought it was. But you see, each thing you put in has a prefix. The PDs count against you. The ROs you have to tell the police. The UBs, you don't have to unless it has a general statute prefix, suffix afterwards. Then you have to tell the police anyway. So here are the rules. Here are the consequences that you can give them. Again, we don't just report on consequences. And then in the end, these are very graphic, by the way, all of these federal definitions of the 17, now 16 acts of crime and violence. One of the things that I don't like is that we decriminalize a couple. There are 16 now. So this is your Bible. It tells you everything you're supposed to do and not supposed to do. This is an old one I can show you. You say, Dale, what in the world is NCY? It's Power School. This is the precursor to Power School. It looks just like it, you'll see. And I can show you this one would not have been for public release. But since we decommissioned NCYs and switched, and it's now Power School, I can show it to you. This is, you'll see my name on this from 2009 here somewhere. There it is. There's my name. That I have this commissioned. And so the notion here is in Charlotte Mecklenburg, I took it a step further. Between the state and federal manual and the code of conduct, I created this for administrators when I trained them and said, this is how you will do this. I went through it, as you can see, screen by screen. And I hired professional trainers to do this, to put this together. And then I would do this with them once a year. But you can see every scenario, this is how I want this done. Don't get this wrong. Don't expect me to defend you if you've done something shady, if you didn't follow these rules. If a boy punched another boy on the school bus, or 3 boys jumped another one on the school bus, and you put it down as bus misbehavior, that's assault with injury, and that boy ended up in the hospital and his parents sued us, and we find out it happened on the bus. That's got nothing to do with anything. What happened to him? Well, he got hurt real bad, but why didn't you put down assault with injury? Well, it counted against us. I can put it down as bus misbehavior. No, you can't. And that's what that manual spelled out. If I catch you doing something other than what I've got in this manual, I'm gonna fire you on the spot. We can't afford the liability that you would bring on our district. I told you the story of the principal who put down that it was assault on staff, but without injury, and then they denied his workman's comp claim when he was out for a year having surgery to reattach his arm. He said, well, he'll probably get the use of that arm back. That's not, but if it was your arm, would you think that wasn't a serious injury? That you had an arm that was useless and was having to have multiple surgeries to basically put it back together? I'm going to be out for a year. Without injury means he came back to work the next day. Doesn't mean that he's going to be out for a year having multiple surgeries. Well, to make our numbers look bad. But there's consequences to that. When he went to file for his workman's comp, he was denied. Said the principal said you weren't hurt. I'm like, what? She said, well, I didn't know they were going to do that. I said, but when you enter into this fraud, this act of deception, it has far reaching. Parents can go to the magistrate and file charges. They can go to police and make police reports. You think that you're going to hide? I mean, what has happened lately, especially in Charlotte, and I've got one from a while back, how prescient was this, is we've gotten to the point now where we threaten or punish victims to get them not to tell it. That's the whole Myers Park story in a nutshell, what's going on. Look at this. I think sometimes they learn this stuff from watching me. This was reported in 2018. This assistant principal ended up getting about 4 years in prison because she failed to report a child abuse or neglect. But here's the best part. Not only did she fail to report it, suspended the girl and forced her to apologize to the fellow who assaulted her. That's pretty much what happened at Myers Park. That's the playbook. When we dismissed the entire administrative staff at Charlotte High School, when I say we, that would be me, principal all the way down to the data manager, everybody, they did the same thing. A civilian came in and reported that a sexual assault was occurring on the ball field. They went out there, was their star football player. They suspended the girl and threatened her if she told it. That was prior. That was in probably 2010 or 11. That's why I pulled that one. That's common. Myers Parks, and did you notice this week that the young lady has refused a settlement, wants to go to court on the Myers Park case? That's what she's saying is they punished her. A boy dragged her in the bathroom. This wasn't a mutual that went too far. He just grabbed her at random and took her in the bathroom and raped her, and they punished her. To get her to be quiet and not tell anybody. But,
So Dr. Lamb, I have a question. What do you, and I think we might have discussed this in one of our classes, what do you do when you are doing the right thing, but the higher ups are not? So then where does it fall if you as a principal do report and they come back and say, well, you can't make that as the report?
they can't tell you that you can't do that as a report. You make the report, they don't have to like it, but they can't take it out. And they can't tell you not to do it. Now they can say, we don't like you having done that, but now they're not going to go on the record and do that because it's against the law.
Gotcha.
They can't tell you not to report. You are the reporting agency. Go back to 288. Who assigns grades? Superintendent can't tell you what grade to give and can't tell you what to report. Principal is the one who has the reporting authority and a responsibility. Now you could say, well, they didn't want me to. Well, I want my hair to fall out. You old enough, you won't hurt you. This is what we do. Nobody can give you permission to break the law. If you did that and you got caught, do you think they'd stand up and say, well, we told her to break the law? You think they'd tell you that? They wouldn't know your name. We don't know her.
Right.
We've never entered into any kind of discussion, certainly nothing in writing.
Right.
And so, if you're working with people that shady, you don't need to be working for them to begin with. But no, you are the one who makes the decision. Now, don't get buyer's remorse. That's one of the things, boy, I used to get after APs, especially new folks in the business. Don't get buyer's remorse. You get home and you get cleaned up, you know, you get some ice on your eye where it was swole up. You know, you change clothes and got a bath and got some of the blood off of you. And then you get to thinking, boy, I'm gonna put that down. It's gonna look really bad on our school. You know, maybe it wasn't as bad as I remember. Don't get buyer's remorse. Put it in there immediately, and what it is what it is. The next day, it ain't near as bad once the blood's all mopped up. You know, you start to heal up, all that. Then you get to thinking, well, maybe it wasn't that bad. Sound familiar about what's like January 6th? Now, all of a sudden, it was just a group of like-minded people just getting together to have a discussion, wasn't it? What about all them people that got killed? That wasn't that bad. See, that's what I mean, time and distance. Why do you think criminals try to delay their trial as long as they can? It gets smaller the further in the real view mirror it is. Well, you got to be careful about that as a school administrator, because all of a sudden, you know, that fight on Friday all of a sudden becomes aggressive action on Monday, except one of the parents went and filed charges, and then it came out that there was a bloody knockdown, drag out, and kid lost this and had to go to the hospital for this, or lost this many teeth or whatever, and you reported as a scuffle. And you better believe the police will throw you under the bus in a heartbeat if you do something shady like that. Now, I had a great relationship with all the resource officers that I ever had when I was a junior high and senior high principal in Charlotte. I had a great relationship with the police department that I supervised when I was in the central office. Full disclosure, never had a crossword among them. But now the deal was everybody's going to be sprayed up, and we're going to play this thing right. We're going to play it straight up and legal. And as long as you do that, you'll get along famously. But now when you start trying to pull a little shady stuff and hide things and cover things up, and they start getting sued and get in trouble, they'll toss you head first under the bus. You know, the lady at North Meck whose daughter claimed that she'd been raped at North Meck, and they didn't tell the police, did an investigation themselves, not be very clear. North Meck, their lower driveway, Hambright Road, their lower driveway is the line, the border between Huntersville and Charlotte. North Meck is on the north side of Hambright. I mean, it's literally their back driveway. So they're in the town of Huntersville. They're not in the city of Charlotte. And so the police department that serves them and has their SRO or two, when they had all those, they got one now, at one time had two, was the Huntersville PD. And of course, this mother, she got to the news media and screamed and yelled at the school that the Huntersville PD had not taken her daughter's charges or allegations seriously, and wore them out. So their chief came on TV and said, we're quite certain a crime was committed, but the school's improper investigation and lack of reporting to us, we can't do anything because the evidence has now been contaminated or tainted or is now missing, and just threw them under the bus. We had no, one principal, one AP gone because of that. Because what did they do? They didn't tell the police when the girl came in and reported. And one of the APs decided, basically was looking for a loophole, didn't want to report it because their numbers were looking bad, and said, she's 16, it was consensual. But here's the problem with that. I'll let y'all amateur detectives, y'all tell me what's wrong with that. I'm gonna go to one. I think I've got one already pulled up. I do. I always keep a backup. We're gonna look at cyberbullying. All right. All of them say this. Somebody read that. I'll read it out loud. If the person being assaulted is mentally disabled, mentally incapacitated, or physically helpless, and those should know is mentally helpless, then it's worse. You can see it's in all of these, and if we went back to inappropriate, it would be there as well. So anybody want to try to venture a guess as to what this means? Well, what it means is, and I'll kind of cut to the chase here, in North Carolina, the age of consent is 16. You know, even if you're a willing participant, at 16, you can consent to some kind of sexual or behavior. Except, what if you're EC self-contained? Can you consent at 16 if you're legally consent at 16 if you're EC self-contained? You cannot. If you are mentally incapacitated, and by definition, if you're a self-contained EC and that they have a self-contained unit at North Mech, and that was the mother's claim. That was her whole thing. She didn't say that her daughter was dragged into the bathroom and said they weren't supervising them and she was having sex and she was pregnant. But she had an IQ of about 40. She was self-contained. And they said, no harm, no foul. She's 16, except there is no 16. These boys were just, going by and getting her out of class and taking her down to the bathroom. They said, well, she's 16. Nothing happened here. Oh, yes, it did. She can't consent at any age. She's mentally incapacitated. Well, we forgot that part. No, you conveniently forgot that part because you didn't want to have to, there was multiple times this happened. You didn't want to report 17 or 18 sexual offenses on your campus with the same girl. And so it was easier to say, oh, she's 16, except they knew what would they have known if they'd have presented this to the police? The police would have said that's not the case. So they just very quickly and quietly didn't tell the police and said nothing to see here. And the mother did not accept that. She had a pregnant daughter with an IQ of 40. And went to the news media. And so the Huntersville police were taking it on the chin, and their chief came on and just threw North Mech right under the bus. See, there's consequences beyond the walls of the school if you do this bad stuff, is what I'm telling you. It will become known. You will get caught. Bad things will happen to you. You will lose your home. These things. It's much better for us if we acknowledge what happened up front and move on. It's always the cover up, the conspiracy that always gets us illegally. That's the part that comes back and backlashes on us. We can deal with it if we know up front, but we can't handle all this cover up business, and that's become it's not the non-reporting that's getting us, it's the under-reporting. It's calling a rape a inappropriate touching or something like that, or something bad happening on the bus. We call it bus misbehavior when that's jumping seats, not jumping on another kid. That's the deal here. And to the point where even in CMS, where it was such a problem, we got caught by Charlotte Mecklenburg, this reporter, Peter Smolowitz. He compared all these police reports to what was being reported by the district. And that's how I got that job, that next job that got added to my duties in the central office there was like 7,000 arrests and only about 1,100 reports from schools. It was like 6 times as many as had been reported to, that these arrests were happening and schools weren't reporting it. And it became a big thing. And so that got to be my new job, one of my new jobs. But the whole notion here is whatever the rules are, follow. That's the only that's the only protection that you have. Know that manual from top to bottom. Know what's your code of conduct, because that manual has your state and your federal laws together in that one manual, disciplinary data. Then your local code of conduct has it, and has your due process in it as well. What you're going to get. It has the range, has all that. Even we went a step further in the big districts. They may even have a manual like that one I showed you that we put in your hand, says if this happens, do this, and you'll be okay. And you could always call me. You know, this is what happened. What should I report? Report this. Now, don't call me and then not do it. Now, if you call me, but now if you call me and I say do this and you say I won't do that, then don't ever call me again. Report it as I've told you, and we'll be fine. But now I don't want to have to go to court with you. I don't want to have to, defend that you did this, that, or the other. It's kind of like in one of our, in our cyberbullying tonight. I want to make sure you read that cyberbullying law. It's a law for everybody. It's not just for school. So let's go to that one. Here's one that, and I want to make a point on it. One of the things that I hear almost constantly every semester is this notion. I pulled it up, I think. This notion is we don't know where it happened. We don't know it wasn't a school device. That does not matter. If it creates or certain to create a hostile environment by substantially interfering with or impairing students' educational performance, opportunities, or benefits, then you've got to deal with it. But I can't tell you the number of times that I had folks say, well, we don't know where it occurred or what happened, or they didn't use the school computer. What's that got to do with the price of eggs in Geneva? It does not matter. If it creates a disruption in school, you've got to deal with it. And now here is the cyberbullying law. By the way, this has not been repealed. That's another one that I would hear. Oh, that cyberbullying was repealed. I don't have to worry about that. That's not true. The only part of this that was repealed was the Twitter war deal. If you were involved in a Twitter war, back and forth with somebody, instant messaging, Facebook, Twitter, and you started losing, you couldn't claim then that you were being bullied if you had entered into this back and forth. That's the only part of this that was repealed. Everything else is still here. You need to read this. What cyberbullying? This is North Carolina Statute 14. That's not a school statute. You know that 115 is school. You can't do all of these things, especially for minors. You can't do these things. And if they happen at your school, you must deal with them, period. It doesn't matter. Well, they didn't send this text while they were at school. Does not matter. They didn't use a school computer. Does not matter. The law says you will deal with these things. And the state bullying law, which passed the school violence prevention, what we call the bullying law, in 2009, says that you will handle it if it creates a disruption at your school, period. You will deal with it. You will not ignore it under the guise of either it didn't happen here or we don't know where it happened, or this guise of, oh, that cyberbullying was repealed. That is not true. Twitter war was repealed. Facebook war, a back and forth, yeah, social media. That's the only part that was repealed. You must deal with it. You must not underreport things that happen. It's something much less, so it don't look as bad on you. And you must not, make completely fraudulent claims like that the law was repealed when it wasn't, or misinterpret the law to, if I don't know where it happened or what they used, the law doesn't say that either. It says if it happens at your building, you have to deal with it. That's what it says. for some reason, we have a real problem with people following through with discipline because you end up punishing yourself. So the notion here is, and the salient question that one of you should ask me is, Dale, what do we do then? Well, I'll tell you what you do. You work on the concept of antecedent behaviors. That if you can stop the little things, that will stop the big things. But that little things left unattended in your building will become the big things. And so after the year that I retired, or maybe the year after, I was the guest for the North Carolina Helpful Living, the big convention they do at Curry is it still called Curry in Winston-Salem, right there at the old Four Seasons Hotel at High Point Road and 40.
Greensboro.
Yeah, so I was the man one year there. That tells you how much help they needed. They had me be the keynote. And so this is what I did for them. Identification and prevention of antecedent behaviors and development of prevention strategies to assist schools in decreasing violent act on their campuses. So the notion here is if you can stop the little things, that the big things. And so now remember, this I presented in 2011. The majority of the work, I hired criminologists. We did the majority of this research work in 2010. Gang activity, cyberbullying, bullying. This is 12 years old, folks. Sexual harassment, sexting. These were the topics for the next decade. How close was I? Pretty close. Nobody ever even heard of cyberbullying in 2010. Nobody knew about all this stuff. And so I've developed the federal guidelines 2001 that established that, persistently dangerous schools. The board had adopted No Child Left Behind standards. Persistently dangerous schools, here are the things that count. All that stuff. So I established that it's pretty penal if you have these bad things happen at your building. Again, here's the list of them. If you have these things happen, people say, but they're random. No, they're not random. We know that there are little things that lead to these big things. And so we get into violence prevention. We do psychological. We'll go through all this. This is, by the way, is the criminologist that I hired. A lot of the stuff that we risk factors, things that you can do: poor design, overcrowding, lack of firm caring disciplinary procedures, student alienation, multicultural insensitivity, teacher and peer rejection of at-risk students, student resentment towards school routines, lack of proper supervision. That's how you get into these bad things. Positive factors that you can do. Possible anti-violent measures within a school, your code of conduct, intervention teams, intervention specialists, BMT, security, alternative learning programs, alternative schools, transitional case managers. You need to have those things. Don't need to cut those out of your budgets. Gang awareness. We were having a huge gang problem in Charlotte back during that time, from the 90s into the 2000s to the 2000s. That was our biggie. That's where most of our guns and weapons were coming out of gang stuff, and all of our drugs. How to recognize those. These were pictures taken in Charlotte, by the way. Our locally ID gangsters, and then our level of involvement. You work through, the levels of involvement for gang members, understanding the graffiti, all the stuff that we've taken off kids. This one's a good one. 1-3, Sereno 13, 1 blue, and then a blank, and then 3. So that's 1-3, 1-3. All these tattoos, how to identify all this stuff. Sexual harassment, again, 2010 said this is the cottage industry of the school business, is sexual harassment, misbehavior. All they talked about Title IX, all these things. You'd think I put this together last week. But the notion, you can, I won't go through, continue to pat myself on the back here, but the notion is this. If you can address flags, tattoos, symbols, bandanas, and stop the gang activity in your school, you'll stop majority of the drugs and the majority of the weapons. If you will stop the inappropriate touching, displays of affection, you'll get rid of most of your sexual stuff. If you'll stop the texting and the cyberbullying and the bullying, you'll get away with most of your violent stuff. The little things become the big things. That's the whole notion of antecedent behaviors. That's how discipline works. Supervise, be on your hotspots, track your data. When you put an incident in Power School, it asks you to put a location. You run a report by location. Know where your hotspots are. Make sure your teachers are on that supervision schedule after school and that duty roster during. You go to the lunchroom and there's 300 kids in there and 6 faculty members. Are you covered legally when you go to court? Let me do that math again. There's 300 kids in the cafeteria. You got 6 staff members on duty. Are you okay if you go to court, if something happens, somebody gets hurt? How many more would you need? Just one more. The legal standard for adequate supervision is 1 to 45. 6 for 300 would be 1 for 50. You're outside of that. You say, well, that's close. Nah, it's ain't hand grenades or horseshoes. When you go to court, did you have 1 for every 45 or didn't you? Well, we had a teacher that didn't come today. She was back with a kid around. I don't care why she wasn't there. If we're supposed to have 7, how many we need to have? We need to have 7. Dale got here late. He wasn't back there on the bus lot when the kids came in. 2 kids got off, and one of them had sent one of them a nasty text, and he just punched him right in the nose as soon as he got off the bus. He was waiting on him. Did you have adequate supervision? No, the person that was supposed to be there wasn't there. Kids running in the hall, this, that, and the other. Well, teachers didn't come to their doorway like they were supposed to. All these things happen. And the little things become the big things, and the unsupervised things become the big things. If kids know where they can go on your campus where nobody will be watching, guess where they'll go? On your campus where nobody's watching. It's amazing how that happens. Supervision. Keep the little things from becoming the big things. The school that where we had all of that problem that we discovered with all the sexual misconduct on the bus that was just being reported as bus misconduct or bus misbehavior. Me and the criminologist went out there. I took him out there with me, and we were doing the pre-audit for them, and we walked around, and I said, I don't believe I've ever seen a school with as much inappropriate sexual behavior as this one in terms of touching and kissing and inappropriate displays of affection. I mean, the kids, they're just all over one another. And then it came to light within the next 8 or 9 weeks while we got them, we'd been working with them out there. Then it came to light when this parent group went to the media that 11 rapes had occurred on the bus. 11 had occurred on the bus. I was not surprised at all. That's why we were there, is because it was just like Love Island. It's I'd never seen anything like it. And they just completely let it go. And it was manifesting itself with just the worst behavior ever. So that's the notion here, folks, is yes, you got to do processing, but you got to be vigilant. You should try to involve parents in discipline. That don't mean they have to agree. They're never going to agree, and you try to do things that are restorative justice. But the big thing is report it, deal with it, try to stop it at the lower levels before it gets out of hand and becomes the big thing. I think that's pretty much everything I had for you tonight. I see our time is about up. Let's look through and see. Again, this is a pretty good one. It kind of covers everything on the gamut on trying to stop these big things from happening on your campus that will cost you your job. If you have 2 years where you exceed the total, you're out as principal and AP, your administrative team is gone. That's no child left behind, remember, and it tells you that right here, no child left behind. That kids don't have to go to a persistently dangerous school. And right here's your numbers. 5 for 0.5, 0.5, half of 1%. That's 2 for every 100. Here are the ones that count against you. If you do this 2 years in a row, you're out. Got to know that. And the way to deal with that is not to cheat and underreport or threaten the victim and punish them. People say, why in the world? Why in the world would you punish the girl? Well, what are you trying to do? You know, she's not going to go along with it. It was hand holding. I've been raped. We'll punish her and try to force her into submission, because if we have to report that, we're going to be over our total. Make sure that you know the bullying statute. I've got it in there. This is it right here. It has not been repealed. And here is the bullying from the School Violence Act that says what you have to do. I have a really good, by the way. Here's the article on Title IX. Here's a couple of things that Dr. Kate and Maraglia have in their folder that might interest you. Again, this is, you know, it's not unusual to threaten the victims, because we're trying to keep these things from coming to light. I have a really good, because I didn't do it, I had somebody do it for me. I have a good school improvement plan on how to combat bullying here, by the way. And what you should do and things you can do. This would be a good one for that toolkit. But here's how you can try to deal with bullying. And I think that's everything that I had for you tonight. Looking at the weekly schedule. Again, next week, we will have our second case study. All right, I think that's everything for tonight. Questions you have for me? Now, y'all need to stop me more often and have questions if you have them along the way. But anything else that you have, I'll stop my share. I think that's everything I had pulled up. Questions you have for me? Okay, everybody has gotten the rant for this week in terms of deal with it up front before it gets bad. And then when it gets bad, take your lumps, report it. Don't try to hide it. Don't threaten victims. Don't punish victims. Don't do dumb things. You know, be smart and honest. It'll stand you in better stead. Trust me. Understand that there's a manual that has all your federal and state stuff in one handy dandy location. And then you have your code of conduct from your district is basically due process and what your consequences are going to be. That was built as a result of that federal and state manual. The local is charged with the code of conduct. And that's the way it works. Thank you all for joining me this evening. If you got questions, be in touch this week. Everybody have a good week. I'll see you next Tuesday.